COVID-19. This is Dick speaking. Let's do this. Hello, everyone. My name is Dick Lucas, a student from the HIP number 4. This is for release on March 16th, 2020. We're going to try to get it out there before then. We're going to talk about COVID-19 facts, how the markets are responding. Sequoia Capital has an interesting post. We're going to talk about the destruction of gatekeepers. The destruction of gatekeepers allows for more disinformation, but also allows for more true information. We're going to go down memory lane, look at how the 2008 financial crisis unfolded. Oil war between Russia and Saudi Arabia, you might have missed that. What Trump's trade rep was doing 30 years ago, kind of come full circle there. Look back at what was written about 9/11 2 days after it happened. We're going to talk about a clip, Twitter and Facebook, that they labeled as fake or partially true. We're going to look at Congress coming together over against the executive branch. Might have missed this as well. And also, we're going to talk about Amazon just walk out and Waymo and some interesting blockchain cryptocurrency stuff going on. So this is shooting from the hip. I link to everything I talk about. I'll link that in the show notes. Maybe not every single thing, but definitely the highlights. I'll link that. So I encourage you to take a look at those sources. These things I'm going to be going on over COVID-19. Not my personal opinions, just things I've read that I want you to know. We're going to go over all that stuff. And I'm shooting from the hip here, so I'm going to move fast. We're going to go quick. We have a lot of stuff to cover. I promised I would make these shorter. I've got fucking more notes than I've ever had with this thing, and I've done it. It's been a shorter period of time. So a lot's happening. I think there's a lot that's worth to reflect on. So some housekeeping. Subscribe on YouTube, wherever, and also you can listen wherever podcasts are available. Twitter and Instagram. You can also subscribe to the newsletter, which I send out once a month, which covers a lot of the things I talk about. Reach out, comment. I want to hear from you what works, what doesn't. You can reach out at dick@nogradient.com. We're also looking for help on this. Me and Charlie are looking for help on this with your time, but also you can contribute on Patreon, Venmo, and Cash App. That's Dick Lucas, at Dick Lucas for Venmo and Cash App. It costs about $500 a year to maintain all this stuff, just with the monthly fees and all that for distribution and the website and stuff like that. And half the contributions are going to Charlie right now. He's a full-time partner right now, so we're working together on this. So he's going to UCLA, so let's help support him there. I'm gonna appreciate Nancy, my aunt. We got Will Conway and Aaron, who's the first person I haven't met, or actually the second person I haven't met that contributed to the show. So I appreciate that. Okay, let's get right into it here. So COVID-19 facts. I'm going to be talking about a lot of different things right now. I'm going to talk about what some experts are saying, where we think this is going to go. I want to get this out of the way first. We are operating under incomplete information. So, yes, there are going to be things that are said today by experts that turn out to be wrong, probably. Maybe they're right. But my point is, if you can, I think you should limit travel as much as possible. Now, this is easier for white-collar workers. You can work remote. So for those of you that you can work from home and that's a viable option, I encourage you to do that. Limit social distancing. Wash your hands. Call your grandparents. Make sure you have a system in place for them. I know I'm doing that. I'm worried about them. Even your parents, they might be old, getting to that older, higher risk. Make sure you have a plan with them. Don't go to restaurants at this point. Limit all social activity, especially in groups, as much as possible. Stay indoors. Obviously, you got to go to the grocery store to get food, but just limit as best you can. So we're gonna talk about the facts here, but that's the one thing. You can shut this off right now and get 99% of what you need to get out of this podcast. Just limit distancing as much as you can. Now, there's many people that can't stay at home. They need to go to work. A lot of blue collar jobs, you don't just who can do that remotely. So the people that can need to limit their exposure to allow the people that don't have the luxury of working remote to go do their jobs. Because the more people that are going out, the faster this thing is going to spread. Also, this isn't just an issue about a virus getting people sick. That is part of the issue, but this is also an issue of people's daily routines getting messed up. Weekly routines. I mean, this is going to affect probably your annual routines, a lot of these things. So there's going to be a lot of things that are affecting you outside of the virus. Take the markets, for example, another thing. People worried about their retirement. now's the time to be strong for your friends and your family. Be a rock. Don't freak out. Be calm. Be composed. But do what you can to limit. Do what you can to educate people and limit social interaction, because it's all well and good that young people, what we're seeing is, again, a lot of this is caveated, but what we're seeing is young people, it can only be as severe as, the common cold. So it's not that big of an issue for young people. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to spread it. That's the number one thing, okay? You don't want to ruin someone else's grandma's day or their life legitimately. So limit as best you can. I know I'm doing that. I'm not going out at all. I'm fucking locked down. Just trying to do, it's a small thing, but just trying to limit my exposure to other people. That's not true. I am going for runs around the block. I'm not going to be a full hardo. I'm just staying here. I'm going for runs, but I'm not meeting up with groups. I'm advising other people to do the same. Now listen, this might be an overreaction. I don't think so. I'm not an expert, and the experts don't think so either. But my point is, just do what you can. Do what you can to limit it, because that's only going to help the situation. And early on is the most important. So don't wait for this to ramp up. Don't wait for this to get to the point where, damn, okay, now we really need to start taking this seriously. Start taking it seriously now, and we'll get through this. Be strong. Keep your composure. And yeah, so I'm going to go through some of the facts, but that's the bottom line. That is what you need to do. Limit exposure. Wash your hands. And keep, if you're sick, stay at home. We're going to talk more about that stuff, but that's the number one recommendation. But let's get into it. Another couple things. So you hear this term, flatten the curve. So a big issue, this is probably going to affect a good chunk of Americans and the world, right? A lot of people are going to get this over the next year, 18 months, whatever it is. What we want to do is to slow the growth of it. So you hear this term, flatten the curve. So what it looks like is if everyone's doing their day-to-day stuff regularly, and no one changes a thing, we're going to see a spike. And what that spike does is it overwhelms healthcare systems, not only in the U.S., but everywhere in the world. We're starting to see this in Italy. We'll talk more about that. So you want to flatten the curve. So we want to do this instead of this. So we're going to do a slow burn on this, so that a lot of people don't get it all at once. What does that do? That overwhelms the healthcare system. That prevents people from getting the care they need. So we're talking about if you're in a car accident or you have some other traumatic event, you need to go get emergency care. Boom. What if there's not a bed available to you, or there's a situation where we need to choose between giving care to this person or giving care to that person. So we want to avoid that as much as possible. So that's one thing. Also, you hear numbers, and this is something Max Roser, I mentioned this, Our World in Data. I'll link to his publication. It's so far. He's on Twitter. Our World in Data, also full website. That's the number one source I'm using right now to stay informed on this. But his whole thing is publications are missing the point. They're talking about, instead of talking about the growth rate, they're talking about absolute numbers. So you hear 100 confirmed cases in county X. You say 100 is a small number. What you need to look at is the growth rate. The growth rate is what's important, because if there are 100 now, there were 50 5 days ago. What happens if that keeps going up? We're looking at exponential growth here. So I encourage you not to say things like, well, there's only X. Well, yes, you may be right about that. Also, there may be a lot more cases that are being, in fact, there's certainly more cases that are being officially reported. But the point is the growth rate. So that's what we want to look at here. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about some stuff from the CDC here quickly. So people are thought to be most contagious when they're most symptomatic, the sickest. Some spread might be possible before people show symptoms. There have been reports of this occurring with this new coronavirus, but this is not thought to be the main way the virus spreads. So if you have symptoms, for sure, lock yourself down. But that's the thing. You may be able to spread it even if you don't have symptoms. So that's why you need to take extra precaution. Okay, with 3 months of data, though, it appears that around 80% of people, and again, when I talk about this data, we're working with unknowns here. Again, I'm going to caveat this again. We're working with unknowns here. So some of this data right now, it's incomplete, right? We're getting, different countries are handling this differently. They have different testing procedures and all of that. So these these numbers may turn out to be true. They may turn out to be false, but the point still stands. Again, do what you can to do your part to limit the spread of this. I really encourage you, if you can, to do that if it's viable. So I'm still going to go through these numbers here. So 80% of people who are infected have a mild or moderate illness. Around 50% have a severe disease, which requires hospitalization. And around 5% are critical and go into respiratory or organ failure. Around 3% of people with confirmed cases of the infection in China died, according to the World Health Organization. Okay. So people who are over the age of 60 are at higher risk of developing a severe case of COVID-19. According to data collected by the World Health Organization, the highest death rate is in people above the age of 80. Around 15% of people in that age group died from the disease in one set of Chinese patients. Now, it's possible. So again, your grandparents, your parents might be over 80. Hell, you might be over 80. Be extra cautious. So 15%, that sounds like a very high number. It may be lower in the United States. Our healthcare system is better. So again, maybe it's 15%, maybe it's 5% in the U.S. Whatever it is, you are at risk if you are older. So you should limit yourself if you are at risk as much as possible. Limit social interaction, and also if you're young, you need to limit social interaction, because if you run into an older person, you might give it to them. Okay, so we all need to do our part here. Okay, so children, on the other hand, don't appear to get as sick. So I've seen conflicting reports on this, and we'll talk about that. But very few develop the disease in the first place, and if they do, only a small group develop severe or critical disease. No young children have died from the virus in China. Researchers are still trying to figure out why that's the case. It may be that children's lungs are less susceptible to infection, or that their immune systems are stronger. Children might carry the virus around, though, and pass it between each other and then to their parents and caregivers. So I think that's the consensus right now. I did see one conflicting report that children are not affected, which I think maybe means that they can still get it, but they're not personally affected. So it's looking like children are less at risk, but it's looking like they can still give it to other people. So people with chronic conditions, people with underlying health conditions like high blood pressure, kidney disease, cancer, diabetes, are also more likely to get very sick or die from COVID-19. So it's not just age. If you're already susceptible to this, to certain health issues, this can affect you. Around 9% of people with diabetes who contracted the virus died, for example, as did around 8% of people with high blood pressure. Most people who are young or healthy or who contract the virus don't get severely ill. But if you have the virus, even if you don't get that sick, you might come into contact with people who are most at risk. Again, this is why you need to be careful. Epidemiologists. Again, I'm quoting the experts here. This is the first time I've ever said, third time I've said this word in like my life. So I'm quoting the experts here. I don't claim to be an expert on this. Shooting from the hip, I don't claim to be an expert on this. I look at what the experts are saying, and I give that information to you. Okay, that's what I'm about. I will have my own hot takes, but I'm very careful about, when I'm saying something's my opinion and when I'm saying something is the opinion of an expert and quoting the experts. I think half the battle in the information age, information's a commodity now, half the battle is determining what are the best sources. The other half the battle is, reading them, understanding them, combining them to form new hypotheses, new views of the world. So that's where we're at. 13 minutes in. Here we go. Let's go. Epidemiologists called the naive case fatality rate, may be wrong in two different ways. Okay, the naive case fatality rate is like, they call this, it's number of people who've got it, and number of people who've got it on the denominator, number of people who have died. So why this is naive? First, many of the infections detected at this early stage of the epidemic are recent, so some will eventually result in deaths. That will push the fatality rate up. But many infections have not been spotted because testing for the virus has been patchy. Lots of mild cases of the disease have gone unnoticed. If all infections were actually counted, the results would be a bigger denominator. Remember, total infected, total death rate. So if we know more people have it, if we confirm if more people have it, the denominator is bigger, therefore the death rate is lower. That will push the fatality rate down. As China began to trace infections more carefully, its fatality rate fell. Okay, so now we're going to go, so Dr. Mark Lipsitch, I quoted him last week. Howard Marks has a memo. He quoted him. He's a professor at Harvard. Seems to have a level head about this stuff, and a lot of people are looking to him for guidance. So here's what he has to say. Again, I'll link to all this stuff in the show notes. So several people, including the U.S. president, have suggested that the novel coronavirus SARS-CoV-2 and the disease it causes COVID-19. Remember, COVID-19, I talked about this last week. COVID-19 is the disease. SARS-CoV-2 is the name of the virus. So a virus causes the disease. So HIV, that's the virus that causes AIDS. Okay, that's just an example. So there's a thought. So several people, including the U.S. president, have suggested that the novel coronavirus SARS-CoV-2 and the disease that causes COVID-19. Okay, again, I got to stop here. So when you hear novel coronavirus, here's the thing. Novel means new. We know that. Part of the issue with this is it's a new thing. This isn't something that we're used to dealing with. So when you hear anyone saying anything conclusively at this point, I'd be very weary of. Anyone saying, oh, it's not going to be, it's going to be like X, or it's for sure going to be like Y. What the experts have saying, they've been using what we think at this point based on the data. Okay. I think it's like, most things. The more you know about something, the less certain you claim to be on the topic. That's what you're seeing with a lot of the experts. They're saying, this is what we think based on the data we've seen. They're not saying, oh, this is X, this is like the flu, this is like this. It's like, no. No one can know at this point, 100%. So what we can do, though, are make informed hypotheses. And the hypotheses we're seeing from experts, this is a legitimate threat, and we should take precaution because this is new. Okay, this is new. We haven't dealt with it, so we need to err on the side of caution. Okay, so several people, including the U.S. president, they've suggested it will go away on its own in the warm weather that will come in the northern hemisphere in coming months. Some have even suggested that the experience with SARS in 2003 provides evidence for this assertion. The short answer is that while we may expect modest declines in the contagiousness of SARS-CoV-2 in warmer, wetter weather, and perhaps with the closing of schools in temperate regions in the northern hemisphere, it is not reasonable to expect these declines alone to slow transmission enough to make a big dent. So thinking, and I'm guilty of this too. I'm guilty of thinking it. I thought, okay, when the warmer weather comes, okay, that's when it's going to be okay. As he said, it will likely put a dent in it. It will likely improve. Will it evaporate? Likely not. Okay, so this isn't like that. Okay, so here's a myth he talks about. In 2003, SARS went. This is a myth. In 2003, SARS went away on its own as the weather got warmer. SARS did not die of natural causes. I love that. It was killed by extremely intense public health interventions in mainland Chinese cities, Hong Kong, Vietnam, Thailand, Canada, and elsewhere. These involved isolating cases, quarantining their contacts, a measure of social distancing, and other intensive efforts. These worked well for SARS because those who were most infectious were also quite ill in a distinctive way. The sick cases were the transmitters, so isolating the sick curbed transmission. In Toronto, controlled and precaution. Let's see. This resurgence was eventually. Oh yeah. So there was a resurgence eventually in Toronto. This resurgence was eventually linked to a case from the first wave. The resurgence confirms that it was control measures that stopped transmission the first time. So this is a little different because the evidence we're seeing with COVID-19 is that, or SARS-CoV-2, is that it is spreading even if you're not showing symptoms. So whereas SARS in 2003, the people that were the most contagious were the most symptomatic. That's not what we're seeing here. Okay, we're seeing a different situation here. Again, it's still early. I'm going to caveat all this stuff, but the consensus is err on the side of caution, limit social contact, do what you can, wash your hands, do what you can, as I've said, and I'm going to continue to say. Okay, summary, for the novel coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, we have reason to expect that like other beta coronaviruses, that's a type of coronavirus, it may transmit somewhat more efficiently in winter than summer, though we don't know the mechanisms responsible. The size of the change is expected to be modest and not enough to stop transmission on its own. Based on the analogy of pandemic flu, we expect that SARS-CoV-2 is a virus new to humans, will face less immunity and thus transmit more readily even outside of the winter season. Changing seasons, okay, so that's important. There's not this herd immunity right now because it's new. So until this hit the scene in December in China, no one had any immunity to this. So what you'll see with a lot of other viruses, people are already immune to it, so then the ability to infect other people decreases dramatically. This is new to everyone. No one's immune to it. So that's going to affect the way this spreads in a worse way. So changing seasons and school vacation may help, but are unlikely to stop transmission. Urgent for effective policy is to to determine if children are important transmitters, in which case school closures may help slow transmission or not, in which case resources would be wasted in such closures. So this is, I think, one of the biggest things. Again, this is Mark Lipsitch of Harvard. This is one of the biggest things we're uncertain about right now is school closure. We're talking about closing schools. We don't even know at this point. Again, we have to determine if children are important transmitters, in which case school closures may help slow transmission or not. If they're not important transmitters, then we're closing the schools for no reason, and or not for no reason, but it might not be as effective as other prevention methods would be. So previously it was thought children were not easily infected with SARS-CoV-2, but recent evidence from Shenzhen suggests that children may be infected and shed detectable virus at about the same rate as adults. So now the only question is whether they transmit as readily. It seems likely the answer is yes, but no data as of this writing to my knowledge. Right, and so this is a big issue with kids staying home from school. Something I've read about is kids stay home from school, healthcare workers, people that need to keep the system going, the people that are most on the front lines of this stuff. How are their kids taken care of if they're home from school? Someone needs to watch over them. Again, this is where friends, family, we need to come together and do what we can to help each other out with this. Especially if you have a healthcare worker that's on the front lines, it's very important. Send them a text. How can I help you? How can I free up your energy and how can I free up your time so that you can do the best you can to be on the front lines of this? And no short of save lives. Another aspect is childcare is expensive. Lower income families, they rely on the school to feed their children. A lot of public schools get breakfast and lunch for their kids. This is a big deal. So if you keep them home from school, how do they get meals? And those parents, especially on the lower income side, they need to go to work. They need to make money. Most Americans can't afford a $400, not most, I think it's about, I forget if it's 40%, it's close to 50% that most Americans can't afford a $400 emergency expense. Childcare is certainly going to wipe that out. So we need to do what we can to help these people out. And again, to Mark Lipsitch's point, maybe closing schools isn't the best move. We're operating off incomplete information. So the coronavirus outbreak in Italy has gotten so bad so as to quickly turn doctors are now forced to practice, I didn't change the font of this. I think it's catastrophic medicine, which is determining which severely ill patients should and should not get care based on the resources available. So this is an Axios article, so this is something different. But basically, you're having to choose who gets care. That's how overwhelmed their healthcare system is. So they also say, this Axios post says, the U.S. is not at that point, but a week ago, neither was Italy. Again, look at the growth rates, and look at how quickly it escalated in Italy. Italy's healthcare system is already overbooked. So that's where we're at. So we need to limit this as much as possible. Okay, hold on. I don't want to litter this stuff. Let me get this stuff under the water bottle here. Got the used papers here. Okay, here we go. We're going to keep going, and I'm almost done with all the COVID facts, then we're going to get to the markets, okay? I know this is a little dry, but it's important. So it's important to educate yourself about this stuff. So here we are. We're going to get more to the politics of this stuff. So the uncertainty is high, but a plausible scenario, 1/5 of the population falling ill and a 0.5% fatality rate would lead to 327,000 deaths, or 9 times that of the typical flu season. So this is in the U.S. In 2010, this is from this an Economist article, which is a publication I highly, highly recommend. It's my favorite publication to determine just generally top level, how does the world work? Bird's eye view. I love it. So in 2010, the CDC budget was $12.7 billion in current dollars. Today it is $8 billion. Whether skimpy budgeting, bureaucratic blockages, or both were to blame, it is as yet unclear and sure to be the subject of future investigation. The U.S. largely has done a poor job of responding to this. I should say the federal government up top. There's been mixed messaging, hasn't done a good job. The people on the ground that are getting the information out, the experts that are working at these universities, I commend you. You've done an excellent job. In literal terms, we have no idea about the number of cases because nobody has tested to any meaningful extent, says Mark Lipsitch. Again, so this is The Economist. This is a lot of people are quoting Mark Lipsitch. Howard Marks did. He seems to be the go-to guy to follow this stuff. So I would look him up, Mark Lipsitch. He's publishing quite often. I recommend looking at what he says. He's a professor of epidemiology at Harvard. Yeah, it shows how much of an expert I am on this shit. Epidemiology. So he says tens of thousands of cases in the U.S. seems plausible, he adds. So the European ban of travel, which Trump enacted, so it's they think it's arbitrary because it excludes Britain and accomplishes little now that the virus is spreading from within. Right, so at this point, we haven't contained it. It's spread. It's game on. So limiting people coming in is not really going to do much at this point. It's here. It's spreading. Containment has failed. So Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, and Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York City, have been begging the FDA to speed up approval for automated testing to boost capacity from around 100 tests a day to several thousand that are needed. A doctor at Chicago Clinic says that she has received no kits nor guidance on when they will come. When she sees patients with COVID-19-like symptoms, she has to send them to to be tested at a nearby hospital. This is crazy. Mr. Trump has minimized the threat all the same. On March 9th, he blamed the fake news media and Democrats for conspiring to inflame the coronavirus situation and wrongly suggested the common flu was more dangerous. The same day, Nancy Messonnier, an official at the CDC, was warning correctly that as the trajectory of the outbreak continues, many people in the United States will at some point in time this year or next be exposed to the virus. So we have person CDC and Trump saying completely two different things on the same day. At least get the messaging consistent. I think that's step number one. We want it to be right, but at least get it to be consistent. So this is just showing a complete lack of coordination, and it's ridiculous. So New York City and Chicago have so far resisted closing their public schools, but this might change. Again, this is going to be released on Monday. I'm trying to get it out before then, but this might change. So New York City they've so far resisted closing their public schools, noting that many poor households rely on them for meals and childcare. Again, this is what I was saying earlier. You have a steady job. You're lower income. You rely on your kid being taken care of and fed, even if you're not lower income. Middle class relies on this. Obviously every class relies on this. They send their kid. They know they're going to be taken care of. But some groups of people rely on this a lot more than others. So that's why it's a very. I think this is one of the very difficult things facing the United States right now. This is a very tough decision. So maintaining a healthy population requires. Almost done with the COVID facts, and we're going to talk about the markets. Maintaining a healthy population requires people not to spread the disease, but also to seek treatment without worrying about crippling debt. America is one of the few countries in the developed world that does not mandate paid sick leave. A mere 20% of low-paid service workers can count on it. Mandated paid sick leave is not a thing in the United States. What does that mean? That means that people are going to work sick to keep food on the table. What does that mean? It's going to spread more. That's the reality. So healthcare is also extraordinarily costly. People are uninsured, underinsured. Okay, I want to say this quick before I forget. Healthcare in the United States something needs to be done. This is something that I'm not currently going to give a prescription on what needs to be done. I don't know enough about it to speak to it. I just know that something needs to be done. And another thing I'll tell you is that it pains me that the Republicans' response has thus far been not Obamacare. And Trump with his executive actions to limit Obamacare as much as possible, the Affordable Care Act. That is not a response. I wish the Republicans had, okay, we don't like Obamacare, here's what we do instead. And put forward a plan, not just undo Obamacare. Maybe that's part of the plan. My point is, at the very least, we need to do something. That part, I follow people on the left, I follow people on the right. The consensus is there. Something needs to be done. The Dems, to their credit, Affordable Care Act. Republicans, I think you've been really missing on this one. Give us something, because something needs to be done. So healthcare is also extraordinary cost. People who are uninsured or underinsured, which means liable for a high share of their treatment costs, or fearful of surcharges for using out-of-network hospitals and physicians, may keep away, particularly if their pay has recently fallen or stopped altogether. So this is an amazing quote. listen to this. The idea that people should have skin in the game kind of doesn't work when you're also paying with your neighbor's skin, says Wendy Parmit, a professor of public health law at Northeastern University. So, some insurers, as in Illinois, California, insist that patients will not be made to pay for testing, but as yet there's no such policy as a national level. So that's partly the issue, that the states are managing a lot of this, and there's not as much of a top-down as you have in other countries. But so people talk about putting skin in the game with insurance. You know what I mean? Like, you pay your own money, so you have skin in the game. You have an incentive to keep yourself healthy. Because you'll be paying more for healthcare. So that makes sense, right? Incentives. When you have a situation where you can get other people sick, with the flu, or with with COVID-19, you have a situation where you can get other people sick. Now it's not just a matter of, okay, you worrying about yourself. You're now putting other people at risk because you're you're thinking about your pocketbook, and you should. You should think about your pocketbook. If you can't afford care, it's a tough situation. Insurance is, healthcare in this country is expensive, full stop. So what we're basically asking people to do is fork up a vast majority of their paycheck, potentially, to protect themselves, but also to protect other people. But if you're trying to protect other people, you need to do more than just rely on that one person with their own skin in the game, because they could be a young person. They could be 40, 50. They say, I can't afford to get treated. I need to keep going to work. Bada bing, bada boom. Now all of a sudden they're giving it to other people, and it's a vicious cycle. Okay, so we're going to talk about the markets, and you may be looking at your 401k. We had almost 10% drop in the S&P 500 on Thursday. We're seeing historic level drops, for sure. Let me say this. The stock market is affected by future earnings, right? The stock goes up when people expect future. You're paying for the future earnings of that company, a discounted rate of all future earnings of that company, right? So fundamentally, I believe, and I think a lot of people believe, is that if you believe in human ingenuity, if you believe that humans will keep being able to invent things and share ideas and build things, the markets over time will simply get better. Will simply improve. New companies will be formed. Those companies will do better. They'll get more efficient. They'll make more money. Everyone will get richer, et cetera, et cetera. That's the thinking. Right now, it makes absolute sense. The markets are decreasing, right? They're going down because the future earnings, when economic activity is slowing, people aren't working as much. People aren't paying for as many things. They're not going to spend as much. It's a vicious cycle. That's going to decrease economic activity. Of course, the market is going to go down based on that. But I encourage you, as I encouraged you last week, I encourage all the time, look at the long term. Yes, we will be affected by this. Yes, 07, 09 financial crisis with hundreds of billions in bad loans, which we'll talk more about, causing our economy to be sick from the inside. Boom, growth. That was a huge hit to the stock market. Guess what? We got out of it. We fixed it. We got through it. I do think we will get through this. We will get through this. The question is how long will it take? And I encourage you, don't sell anything in your 401k. Don't any money. Don't move around anything in your 401k. Don't move around anything in your IRA, especially if you're a young person. If you're older, it's a little bit of a different calculus, but I encourage you to take the long-term view still. Especially if you're younger, don't even care about this. I was just talking to a friend. He's like, I'm trying to get my retirement under control now. I'm like, perfect, let's do this. And I advised him, put $6,000 in your Roth IRA right now for the year 2019, because I do that by April 15th. Boom, put it in. Yes, the market could go down more. Nobody knows. It probably will. But over the long term, because humans will keep inventing new things and we will keep getting better at things and more efficient, the markets will go up. In this case, this is an external thing affecting businesses. So it's not all of a sudden that people woke up and said, oh, all these businesses were Enron. All these businesses had fake products. They were publicizing fake revenues. And there's this internal thing, or again, we'll talk about the 08 financial crisis, or they had we're making bad loans. This isn't the case here. This is the case. The market is dropping because the earnings of these companies are going to decrease, full stop, over the next year, likely. So of course the stock market's going to drop. Put it this way: if the stock market didn't drop, that would be a cause for concern, in my opinion. Though I always, I'm never one to question the market. So if it didn't drop, maybe the market knows something I don't. But my point is, it's normal for the markets to react. Economic activity will slow, maybe for the next 18 months, and as things come back online, that is okay. I encourage you to think through the long term. We've gone through things as a species before. World War I, World War II, there's been major oil crisis. I think that was in the 70s. We've gone through major issues before, and we've got through them. Yes, it takes time. But I encourage you, say this. If you're worried about your money in the stock market, you shouldn't put money in the stock market if you need it within a few years. I would even say on the order of 5 to 10, a decade. If you think you'll need that money before that, you should put it in a lower risk account. Or lower risk portfolio, so maybe more bonds and stocks. I talk about all this. I have a post called Lowest Hanging Fruit. I'll link to it. What to do, how to think about your money, how to think about retirement, what to do. It's very specific. It tells you exactly what to do with your money. Literally open up your bank, your fucking checking account in one tab, look at my article in the other, start doing shit with your money. It's that specific. And again, I didn't invent any of this shit. I'm reading what the experts say and giving that information to you. So this is going to change, but stock markets have fallen by about a fifth from their peak, compared to with a 59% drop during the mortgage crisis. So we're not at the '08 levels yet. We are not at the '08 levels yet. Full stop. The amount of toxic debt right now, and this is from The Economist, the amount of toxic debt is limited and easy to identify. Some 15% of non-financial corporate bonds were issued by oil firms or others hit by the virus, such as airlines and hotels. The banking system stuffed with capital has yet to seize up. Interbank lending rates are under control. When investors panic about the end of civilization, they rush into the dollar, the reserve currency of the world. That has not yet happened. Some companies will go bankrupt. Likely. Some bonds will go bad, because a bond is just you're buying a company is selling debt to you. You give them money, they pay it back. That's what it is. If they go bankrupt, they don't pay you back. That's the risk of a bond. Some bonds are riskier than others. So that's the deal there. So banks, based on the '08 financial crisis, they have to have a lot more capital than they used to before. The federal government mandates it, so they have more money. Basically, a fatter rainy day fund. That's basically what it comes down to. So we're not yet at the levels of the mortgage crisis in '08. But it is dropping, and maybe it gets that bad. Nobody knows. I'm not going to say it's not going to get that bad, but again, I encourage you to think long term. We roared back after '08. We roared back. Okay, so think long term. Don't lose your shirt. Stay focused. Okay, so here's some interesting things. You might have heard the market stop trading. Market stop trading. That happened a couple times this week. I'll say this. So here's the rules that there's circuit breakers for when. I think this is interesting. When the trading actually stops. I'm sure. So for non-U.S. audience, I'm sure other markets I know have similar rules to this. But these are the ones. These are the U.S. markets. So here are the rules. There's 3 of them. If the S&P 500 falls 7% from where it started the day, then trading stops for 15 minutes, unless the move occurs after 3:25 p.m. Second rule: if the S&P keeps moving lower to a level 13% below where it started that day, then another 15 minutes of trading halt gets triggered. Again, though, no such halt is imposed if the move comes after 3:25 p.m. If the S&P falls further to hit a level of 20% below its starting point of the day, then trading halts for the remainder of the day. Boom, full stop. This is done to make so people don't make stupid decisions. And it starts dropping a lot. Boom, let's freeze it. Everyone relax. Let's freeze it. Everyone relax. Let's not get this thing in free fall. The purist is me and is thinking, well, if the market is saying that, let people trade. But smarter than people than me have put this regulation in place, and I think it's probably a good thing. I don't see many people saying no, you can allow trading, allowed to go. I haven't seen any of that. Let me take a quick. Let me turn the gain up actually, so you can hear me drink. I'm gonna drink some more water here. Whoa. Okay, so I turn that gain up so you can kind of hear the birds. Yeah, it's a beautiful day out. Okay, here we go. So, okay, so now I'm going to share some things. This is from a company, a venture capital firm called Sequoia Capital. So I'm going to share a blog post from them that it's an open letter to their portfolio companies. The portfolio companies are companies that they invest in. Again, VC, venture capital, invest in early stage companies, help them get big. That's the idea. So I really like to look at information from institutions that really have skin in the game. And what I mean by that is you can read from the New York Times, you can read what an economist or a journalist thinks about something, let's say about the economy or about the startup scene. You can read what they say, and they might be right, they might be wrong. Or you can read what people who work in the space directly are saying. You can read what venture capital firm. Who knows more about the startup scene than a venture capital firm? Who knows more about the business outlook than a venture capital firm? A company that has been, an institution that has been built around surviving financial crises and helping their companies get through it. So Sequoia Capital, they were started in 1972. So they've invested in companies that now total over $1 trillion in market cap. It's truly incredible. So they've invested in Apple, Google, Oracle, NVIDIA, GitHub, PayPal, LinkedIn, Stripe, Bird, YouTube, Instagram, Yahoo, and WhatsApp. So famously, you may have seen in The Social Network, Mark Zuckerberg showed up to Sequoia Capital and said, basically gave a presentation why you shouldn't invest in Facebook. He was trolling them because Sean Parker, who was he was the Napster bro, aka Justin Timberlake, he convinced him to do it, apparently, I think, according to The Social Network. And also, Mark Zuckerberg's talked publicly about this. It definitely happened. The question is, why it happened. But Sean Parker had a bad taste in his mouth working with Sequoia with a previous company. I forgot what it was called. But he basically said, go tell Sequoia to fuck off. So what's interesting is, this is when Facebook was first raising money and looking to, early stages. So famously, Sequoia was not able to invest in Facebook. But what's interesting is, so Zuckerberg, to his credit, has made amends. He has apologized for being a dick to them. But Facebook announced that it would acquire messaging startup WhatsApp for $19 billion. And guess who's WhatsApp's sole venture investor, according to the New York Times, owner of about 18% of the company? That is fucking Sequoia Capital. So it's interesting, right? So that's kind of got their comeuppance there a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the blog post they released. So Sequoia Capital also famously released a presentation during the 2008 financial crisis to their portfolio companies, and that was famously titled "Rip Good Times." And it was a presentation about how that crisis unfolded and what you need to do as a business. So this is similar. And I'm going to go through things that they're telling their companies on how to. Holy shit! I got a lot of time, or I don't have much. Let's see. It's 52 minutes in. I'm gonna have to speed this up a bit. Okay, so I'm just gonna go through their blog post again. This is a blog post, Sequoia Capital, VC firm, giving their guidance to startups. Basically, the startups they've invested in that say, here's the deal. Here's how you're gonna weather this storm. Here's what we think. These guys know what they're talking about. So I love the way it starts. It says, if you want to learn how to wash your hands, this isn't the place for that. That's not what this is about. That's how they open the blog post. So here's what they're saying. They're going to see a drop in business activity, supply chain disruptions. Pure software companies will be less affected. In-person travel and meetings absolutely affected. It will take considerable time, perhaps several quarters, before we can be confident that the virus has been contained. It will take even longer for the global economy to recover its footing. Some of you may experience softening demand. Some of you may face supply challenges. While the Fed and other central banks can cut interest rates, monetary policy may prove a blunt tool in alleviating the economic ramifications of a health crisis. We suggest you question every assumption about your business. Think of your cash runway. We partnered with Cisco shortly after Black Monday. Again, this is Sequoia saying this. We partnered with Cisco shortly after Black Monday in 1987. Google and PayPal soldiered through the aftermath of the dot-com bust. Most recently, Airbnb, Square, and Stripe were found in the midst of the global financial crisis. Constraints focus the mind and provide fertile ground for creativity. So they're saying Listen, chaos is a ladder. Many important and big companies today were founded in times of crises. It focuses you, dig in, get sharp. Okay, so you're going to have to question your sales forecast. Think of your marketing spend, your headcount, your capital spending. Having weathered every business downturn for nearly 50 years, we've learned an important lesson. Nobody ever regrets making fast and decisive adjustments to changing circumstances. In downturns, revenue and cash levels always fall faster than expenses. In some ways, business mirrors biology. As Darwin surmised, those who survive are not the strongest or the most intelligent, but the most adaptable to change. So this thing, act quickly. If you need to, it actually reminds me of looking at that blog post reminds me of the Prince. God, who was it? Machiavelli wrote The Prince. Basically telling a leader how to lead. Well, what's the best way to act? And one of the things he said is act quickly. So if you need to do something, act swiftly, do it once. If I forget the example he gave specifically, and I don't want to misquote this epic book, but but if it's saying something like, maybe quelling a rebellion or something, rather than have a bunch of skirmishes and kill 10 people this day, 20 people that day, 30 people that day, act quickly, do it, boom, right now. So it's just interesting, very Machiavellian reading this. Also, Bill Bishop did an interview with Ben Thompson. I'll talk more about Ben Thompson. Bill Bishop, he was one of the co-founders of MarketWatch, and MarketWatch, they IPO'd, and this was all going on during the dot-com bust. What they did was they acted swiftly. They immediately, they cut staff. They only had to do it once. They acted early rather than the slow, okay, cut some staff. No, cut it immediately, survive, keep the company alive. The blog post goes on. A distinctive feature of enduring companies is the way their leaders react to moments like these. Your employees are all aware of COVID-19 and are wondering how you will react and what it means for them. False optimism can easily lead you astray and prevent you from making contingency plans or taking bold action. Avoid this trap by being clinically realistic and acting decisively as circumstances change. Demonstrate the leadership your team needs during this stressful time. Stay healthy, keep your company healthy, and put a dent in the world. It's absolutely, I think, a very interesting post. Very short. I recommend reading the whole thing. Also, something interesting I just want to point out here. Berkshire recently announced. So Berkshire Hathaway, the company Warren Buffett started. His partner Charles Munger, you may have heard that name as well. They announced, I think, earlier this week that they were. Warren Buffett is known for acting in times of crises and scooping things up for pennies on the dollar when people really need the money. He's been an absolute cobra in those situations. But what he released. They released a bond that pays 0%. So people are buying or very, very low. I don't quite know how the numbers work out, but there's a 0% interest rate, but I think it's maybe a little bit above zero. But basically, they're raising $1 billion of debt, and this is euro denominated. So you may say, why would someone in Europe loan money to Berkshire Hathaway that's not due until 2025, loan them $1 billion, and then basically get back $1 billion by the end of it, or maybe a little bit more? Well, this is something we're not familiar with in the U.S. There are negative interest rates in the ECB, the European Central Bank, has negative interest rates. What that means is the government, if the government's holding on to your money, you're paying them to hold on to your money. And why do they do this? They do this to stimulate growth. That means the ECB does this because they want to, that money shouldn't be in a bank somewhere. It shouldn't be in government securities. It should be out in the market. Go spend it, go invest it. That's why they do negative interest rates. We have super low interest rates in the U.S. We have yet to go negative, even during the global financial crisis. We lowered them. And they're very low today. But at the very least, you can give your money to the government, and you will gain at least some interest on it. So Berkshire Hathaway is basically raising $1 billion, basically an interest-free loan, very free loan to our European brothers and sisters, and saying, you guys have negative interest rates over there. We'll give you the privilege of us holding on to your $1 billion for 6 years, and then we'll just give it back to you, and we get to do whatever we want with it in the meantime. So, it's just super it's super interesting. So part of this is, and again, I'm out on a limb. I'm not a finance fucking expert on this, but part of it is you say, okay, why don't you just put the money in a bank? Like just keep it in cash or keep it in a bank or something. Why do these companies go give it interest free to Berkshire? Well, if you keep it in a bank, it's only insured up to a certain amount. So a company can't just put billions of dollars in a bank, because if the bank fails, they're done. You think of FDIC insurance in the U.S., $250,000. So if you have $250,000 in a checking account, if that bank goes under, your money's insured. And there's SPIC insurance for investment accounts, which I think is up to $1 million. Don't quote me on that, or $500,000. I know it's higher than the FDIC. Anyway, if you're a big ass company with billions of dollars, you can't just go down to Wells Fargo or down to some bank and say, I'm going to open a checking account. Yeah, I'll put $8 billion in it. I think you could. I don't think there's limits against it, but you wouldn't do that. It's not a smart business move. Because if that bank goes belly up, that's on you. You trust the government more than you trust the bank. So that's just an interesting little thing. Oh, also, damn, I wanted to look at Slack. I know Slack had some earnings calls. So I was looking at just some earnings calls and seeing what are people talking about? There's earnings calls, U.S. companies that are required every quarter to give a status update to shareholders. Here's the deal, and that's public. It's actually really interesting to listen to them. I like listening to Tesla ones as well. Tesla earnings calls are super interesting because it's just an insight into the company and how they think about their stuff and what they're telling investors, and they can't be bullshitting you. There's rules by the SEC. They can't say anything they want. So they can't just bullshit you. So just a thing I saw from Qualcomm. So here's a quote from Qualcomm, which Qualcomm makes hardware that's in every single smartphone on the planet. So they know global trade is in their DNA. Supply chains in their DNA. They know how this stuff works. And here's what they said. This was on Wednesday. They said, there's significant uncertainty around the impact from the coronavirus on handset demand and supply chain. Based on the information we have at this time, we are widening and reducing the low end of our guidance range. We remain in active contact with our employees, customers, and suppliers as we continue to monitor the situation. I want to quote this again. There's significant uncertainty around the impact. Significant uncertainty. When there's uncertainty, investors get worried. But again, that goes back to what we were talking about before. We don't know what we are dealing with here yet. This is not peaked. This is not we're still in the midst of this. So I just thought that was an interesting little take. Okay, so there is something I was thinking about that. Let's see, what do we have for time right now? Yeah, I'm just gonna try to get these things down to 1 hour. I think we're making headway, but I'm gonna keep speeding up here. Okay, was interesting to me. If you think about where we were 20 years ago, the fact that we can even work from home and some business can still go on. In fact, a significant chunk can go on. Some of the most valuable companies in the world, the Googles of the world, the Facebooks of the world, Apple, I'm sure. I don't know explicitly if I'm sure their employees are working from home, a lot of them at least. But that's a hell of a world we live in where that work imagine that 30 years ago. Impossible. No way. Yeah, you can do phone calls, but the internet is a truly, 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 truly powerful thing. And I think it's shown how resilient we are as a human species with the technology we're coming up with. The fact that a lot of business can still go on is absolutely insane to me. From your home with a computer on the internet, come on. That is something to be proud of. And I think a lot of people think this. I listen to the experts, but I also think this deep in my bones. We are just scratching the surface of the power of the internet. We are just getting started. I think a lot of things have not even been disrupted yet that will be disrupted. Maybe, what's his name? Chris Dixon says, okay, maybe media's been disrupted. Everything else is still just ripe for it. We're still in the real early stages. Think Fukin, Model T status, or even before that for the automobile. We got a hell of a long way to go. So anyway, I just thought that was an interesting thing. Also, famously, during the financial crisis, Obama's chief of staff said this to a conference of top corporate to Wall Street Journal conference of top corporate chief executives this week. He said, "You never want a serious crisis to go to waste." He elaborated, "Things that we had postponed for too long, that were long-term, are now immediate and must be dealt with. The crisis provides the opportunity for us to do things that you could not do before." His chief of staff saying, never waste a crisis. So I encourage you to think through that. just as a worldview to how you're going to view how your government's going to respond to this. What kind of questions are going to come out of this? Are we going to have some? We'll probably have some serious things about our healthcare system we're going to look at. And I'm not even just talking about just the government level. Look at yourself. Don't let a crisis go to waste. This is a crisis. What assumptions about your own life can be questioned? Maybe you should be saving more money. Maybe you thought 2-month emergency fund was good, but now maybe now you're thinking 4 or 6. So I encourage you to learn from this. A crisis it shakes everyone to their core. It makes them think things they haven't felt in potentially decades. It's an opportunity to shake things out. It's an opportunity to then change some things in your life. Use this, channel it. It's an opportunity to be strong, like I said, for your friends and family. It's also an opportunity to be strong for yourself and make changes in your own life. You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. Don't waste it. Everything's an opportunity. An opportunity to do good, an opportunity to, even if it's as simple as opportunity to step up, educate others, limit social interaction, stay indoors. That's a small thing, but it's not all heroes wear capes, okay? Stay home, that's a big fucking deal. If you should feel good about that if you can stay home. Okay, so Ben Thompson, one of the greatest tech thinkers in my mind. I've quoted him on here before. He had a very interesting post. He has something called the Daily Update, which it costs what it costs, $120 a year about. I'm a subscriber. I encourage you to subscribe to it. On the Welcome to No Gradient post on the website, pinned to the top of the website, I list out every source that I follow. So, and he's one of them. And I list this because I want you to know where my biases are coming from. I want you to know how I educate myself and how I'm giving this information to you. So he's one of the people that I highly encourage people follow. But he gave the example of zero trust computing. So you used to, back in the day, you talk about corporate networks, right? There used to be firewalls, right? Firewalls were a thing. And firewall meant you blocked yourself out from the internet. So you protected the internal corporate network so people from the outside couldn't get in. But then what they started doing is that became a nightmare. So then a stopgap for that was, okay, you could VPN into the corporate network to access those corporate network files. But that did not scale well in a world of, software as a service. People are connecting their phones, they're using all these devices at home, they're working from home more. That is just not a scalable solution. So now there's a zero trust computing model, which is you start by the default that we don't trust you. So what do you have to do? You have to authenticate with a password. Then you also have to authenticate two-factor authentication often. So you also have a code that verifies your identity, that verifies access to certain things. So back in the day, these corporate networks, once you were in, you got access to everything. Now there's a zero trust model to where you get access only to the things that you need access to. I mean, think of at work. If you're working white collar stuff, you don't have access to all the documents the CEO has access to. We take that for granted now. But he talks about like a castle and moat analogy. So once you were in the castle, boom, you could access everything. Now it's completely different. We're using all these devices connecting from all over the place, and that it's shifted. So he goes on and compares this to so I'll just quote him here. In the Middle Ages, the principal organizing entity for Europe was the Catholic Church. Relatedly, the Catholic Church also held a de facto monopoly on the distribution of information. Most books were Latin, copied laboriously by hand by monks. Again, this is Ben Thompson. I'm quoting him. There was some degree of ethnic affinity between various members of the nobility and the commoners on their lands, but underneath the umbrella of the Catholic Church were primarily independent city-states. Okay. So this is an extreme example. Catholic Church dictates during the Middle Ages, here's the information you could read. Okay. Then he says Martin Luther hits the scene using the printing press allows him to get his information out there. So you have a centralized authority, you have a gatekeeper. Martin Luther says, no. I'm going to beef with you, and I'm going to use the printing press to get this out. I don't need to use your monks to copy books. Okay, I'm going to get this out with the printing press. It democratizes information. So his whole point of that, why he brought that up is because you think about today. You think about the same thing is happening today. The printing press versus the monks copying books is the same thing happening with the internet with the internet today. People say anyone's a publisher now. There's no more gatekeepers. New York Times used to be a gatekeeper of information. CBS used to be a gatekeeper. ABC used to be a gatekeeper. That's how America got their news. Now we're dealing with a world where anyone can be a publisher. What does that mean? Well, it means there's more disinformation. Absolutely. The total amount of information, he has this cool graph. He's really good at doing these little drawings that explain things. I recommend, again, Ben Thompson's Stratechery. He has this really cool graph where he says, yes, there's a greater amount of information in general out there, full stop. What does that mean? That means there's going to be more disinformation, but he also says, look at the bright side. There's going to be more factual information on an absolute basis out there as well. So, people talk about, like Facebook's ruining democracy and blah, 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 and all this shit. In these internet platforms ruining democracy, Twitter, blah, blah, blah. Let me give you an example on where it shines. So, on March 1st, the Seattle flu study was citing major outbreak concerns. And this was before the CDC was banging on this drum. They were citing major outbreak concerns. And the CDC and FDA hamstrung them because the lab was not certified as a clinical laboratory. So the Seattle flu study is trying to do things. CDC's and FDA are saying, no, stop it, you're not certified. They're still getting this information out. How'd they get it out? They got it out on Twitter. So the CDC and FDA, they talked on the phone to them to discuss what happened. The message from the federal government was blunt. What they said on that phone call was very clearly was cease and desist to Helen Chu. Dr. Lindquist remembered, stop testing. So the fact that they had Twitter, they allowed this information to get out sooner and potentially save lives, thousands of lives, because they got the word out sooner. So again, there's more truth. There's more truth out there. Yes, there's more information, but there's more disinformation, but there's also more absolute truth. So these platforms are empowering individuals to speak truth without anyone having to give them permission. Yes, that's bad, but it's also good, and we don't look at the positives even. Donald Trump got in the White House without any major newspaper supporting him. That is insane. So these are and you ask, how is that possible? Well, a lot of that, I think, is social media. A lot of that is Twitter. He's speaking directly to people. All of a sudden, I don't go to the New York Times, or I don't go to the Wall Street Journal. I don't go to, the LA Times or whatever it is to get my opinions about Trump. I just, look on Twitter. I see what he's saying to me. Boom. I look at YouTube videos of him talking directly to me. Boom. There's not a filter between. Yes. Am I happy Trump's in the White House? No. But that is a side effect. That is a reality. It is an amazing thing that a president of the United States could get in. If you ask someone, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you think a president can get elected if no major newspaper supports him and no major publication say, what the? Now I think Fox News probably officially endorsed him, but I'm strictly saying major newspaper. Again, it's just I'm just pointing that out because it is an amazing thing. So Ben Thompson goes on to say that in the world of gatekeepers that are crashing down now like never before, more so than the printing press, because the printing press definitely harder to use than just going on Twitter and boom. But he also talked about how Reuters Institute said fake news itself is seen as more of a nuisance than a democratic meltdown, especially given that the perceived scale of the problem is relatively small compared with the public attention it seems to receive. So this is in a survey they did. Also, a previous study by Reuters Institute also found that social media exposed more viewpoints relative to offline news consumption. Another study suggested that political polarization was greatest among older people who use the internet the least. So I think we think of the internet, it's destroying democracy. I'd be careful with those assumptions. I'd be careful not looking at the good thing. Oh, another thing, Ben Thompson pointed this out. There were rumblings that Weinstein was doing some shady shit. He was a big advertiser, I believe. He was a big advertiser in the New York Times. That story got killed. This was, I think, 10 years ago or some shit, 15 years ago. New York Times killed it. Why? Well, he was a big donor. He was a big, not donor, he was a big advertiser. Now, in a world of where we can get the word out ourselves directly to the world, we don't need to go through gatekeeper. Boom, that allows more truths to come out. Yes, it allows more disinformation, but look at the good that comes of it. Right on. Okay, so we're making good headway here. Okay. So here we go. We're going to go down memory lane a little bit. We're going to talk about the '08 financial crisis. Now, I think it's important to talk about that crisis because I think we can learn from it. And I like looking back and seeing what was said about things, major crises back in the day, and I think we can learn from that. If you look at, looking at what is being written about right now, there's not really much. There's no perspective, right? Things are happening live, day to day, bada bing, bada boom. So there's not much time to process it. But I like going back and reading things. Okay, what was being said during the '08 financial crisis? What was being said about 9/11 right after it happened? It's an interesting exercise. So we're gonna go down memory lane a bit. So what's interesting is I mentioned that Sequoia Capital. So I'm going to be talking about their presentation they gave to startups, their portfolio companies that they were invested in during the '08 financial crisis. We're going to talk about that. What's interesting is this was released as a Dropbox, or it was a PowerPoint presentation released as a PDF on Dropbox, or at least now that's how they distribute it. But now it's a Medium post. So it's just interesting. In 10 years, 12 years, you see the different way that things get published, right? So in another 10 years, we're going to see it won't be on Medium, it'll be on something else. It's just fascinating how that works. Interesting. Anyway, I just thought that was an interesting little thing. Okay, so this presentation famously rip good times, because remember, when this '08 shit was going on before, people were, woo, stock market was going up, housing, the value of housing was going up, so it's fitting that it was called rip good times. Okay, so before I start, I just want to say this. There is blame to go around. I think people like to say, oh, it was all the government. Oh, it was all the banks. The reality is the government, the federal government had policies that encourage home buying. So they certainly exacerbated this. Banks were doing shady shit, absolutely. And also something I don't think gets enough credit, people were taking out these loans. Individuals were taking out these loans. Now you may say these banks push these loans on people and encourage them to take on loans that they know they couldn't have. So subprime, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Subprime loans with these like teaser rates. So, you're paying 1% now, then it jacks in after 18 months. It jacks up a shit ton. So then you can't even afford the mortgage. So yes, that's absolutely that's not right. You go to a banker, you trust them, you think they're going to do what's in your financial best interest, but also, take some agency, right? There were also people taking on these loans, a lot of individuals that should not have done that. They straight up should not have done that. So it was all, there's blame to go around. Now, as for what percent, I don't know. That gets a little too technical for me. Okay, so let's start out with their presentation. Okay, so it says, they say this is a housing-led recession. We have an over-leveraged financials, falling asset prices, frozen credit markets, weak household balance sheets, globally synchronized slowing, exacerbating all of the above. Okay, they have another slide that says, the U.S. buys foreign goods. Foreign countries use proceeds to buy treasuries. Demand keeps longer-term rates low. So think of a circle. So U.S. buys foreign goods. Foreign countries use proceeds to buy treasuries. The more demand there is for treasuries, the lower the interest rate. Now, what happens when the interest rates are low? People look to put their capital in other things. They look to you hear about seeking return. And this is historically why we used to raise interest rates historically we've raised interest rates, right? When the economy is doing well, you raise interest rates because you don't want to get too hot. You don't want people you don't want capital to get allocated inappropriately, inadequately, or going to the wrong place. So you raise interest rates to try to temper excitement and prevent people from going too crazy. So when the government raises interest rates from, let's say, 1% to 4%, all of a sudden you say you don't need to chase. I can get 4% return from the government that is not going to default. I'm going to go do that. But when the interest rates are super low by the government, you're going to say, I'm going to go chase returns somewhere else because the government at 1%, not even going to keep up with inflation. Why would I do that? So that exacerbated it. So the total debt as percent of GDP ballooned. So total U.S. debt. Foreign ownership of U.S. Treasuries increased. Liquidity and easing spread to housing. Banks giving dog shit loans. So there's a subprime loan, and this is something I just learned from this. You hear about a lot of subprime loan, right? What is a subprime loan? It's basically a risky loan. It's a subprime loan is you're giving the loan to someone that has a decent chance they won't be able to keep making payments and will foreclose on it. So subprime loan. So subprime loan, and you hear this is something I learned. Alt A loan. So an Alt A is between prime and subprime. So a prime loan is someone that, they've got a good job, they've got a steady income, they've got steady assets, they'll be able to continue to pay it. Subprime, dog shit. Alt A is somewhere between subprime and prime. So banks used to do about 5% of their business was subprime and 5% was Alt A, around there. These both went up to about 20%. So then 20% was subprime, 20% was Alt A, so 40% were some poor quality loans. It was a huge increase in a short period of time. So home prices exploded because there's increased demand, right? The banks are opening up. They're making it easier to buy a house. What does that mean when something gets easier to buy? The prices of that go up. And when the prices of that go up, it increase on some level, it's going to increase demand. Oh, people are saying, oh, the price is going up, got to get in now. I got to buy a house while it's still going up. Got to buy a house while it's still going up. Boom. And then soon the music stops and all hell breaks loose, which is what happened. So there were, let's go on. So structured products and regulatory changes compounded these issues. Growth and securitization, increased leverage, misrated by agencies. Okay, so growth and securitization, that's packaging up these mortgages and then selling them. So basically, now the people giving the loans don't care. They're selling them off to someone else, and they got to deal with them. So they're giving the loans, but they don't care if they're if they're giving the loans to people that they know can pay them back because they're getting it off their books anyway. So misrated agencies, you hear about that. Rating agencies get a lot of shit for this. They looked at some of these securities that were being sold that were made of subprime, Alt A loans, saying, no, these are AAA. This is the U.S. housing market. It's going to do great. They did a poor job rating these. I think Standard & Poor's was one of them. I think there were some others, but basically they had a financial incentive, and they still do. They have a financial incentive for these, the people selling these products. They're going to get business you're going to go to them if they're going to rate your investments that you're selling as AAA. You're going to go give them more business. You're going to pay them to do that. They're going to get more business if they have rose-colored glasses. They're given rose-colored outlook on your investments that you're selling to other people. So when the rating agencies start doing a bad job, that is a horrible situation, and that's exactly what happened. Also, there's the repeal of Glass-Steagall. Glass-Steagall, I think, was started in the I think it was passed in the 1930s, several decades ago. But basically what that did was it separated retail and investment banks so they couldn't do shady shit with your money. So retail bank where you have a checking account, investment bank, they're doing a lot more complicated shit. But what this act did is it separated the two. So basically that these retail banks couldn't be doing shady shit with your money. They were completely separate. That was repealed. Also, home ownership was encouraged by the U.S. government. We always talk about home ownership. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. And with the tax cuts, I think the amount you can write off on your mortgage interest with the latest Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2018. Trump's tax cut. Actually decreased how much you can write off on your mortgage payment. But the federal government used to have encourage it more than they do today. So that was also part of it. So what they said, what does this mean? They said this is all of this shit going on. This is a significant risk to GDP growth. Again, this is Sequoia Capital saying. And Alan, I know you told me I need to remind people, and I appreciate this. Remind people what the fuck I'm talking about. So that's why I'll keep repeating where it is I'm talking about. Because if you come back into something and you stop listening to the podcast, which you do, and you come back into it, you need to know where we're at. So again, this is Sequoia Capital talking about the 2008 financial crisis, talking to their portfolio companies. So significant risk to GDP growth, they said, and potential for greater regulatory reform scrutiny. So consumer debt as percent of total GDP increased from 66 to 73% from 1987 to 2000. The personal savings rate and lower real wage growth over this same time. Mortgage equity withdrawal became the new piggy bank. So people borrowing money against their houses. I love it. Became the new piggy bank. So you buy a house. Your house goes up in value. You take a loan out. The house is going up, and you take a loan out against your house. But if your house drops in value, you're screwed. So people are using their house. They're saying, oh, I can just basically print money because the value of this house is going to go up. So I'm just going to... Anywhere where people are making too much money, you got to be very careful. In hindsight's 2020, obviously. I mean, there were some people that were saying this was not sustainable, but I like the quote: "The market can be irrational longer than you can stay solvent." So even if you're thinking something's going to go wrong, you're like, oh, short the housing market, right? It's possible with the housing market you think it's going to crash in 2. It's possible it takes 10, and your short position, you're basically bet that it's going to go down. Screws you, because if the price of that underlying asset that you're betting against goes up, you have to provide more assets to back it up to cover your losses in case it doesn't fall down, in case those prices don't actually fall down, and it can screw you. So hindsight's 2020, but damn, I like to think that if I was around this time seeing the housing price, I'd be like, what the fuck's going on? But probably wouldn't have been. Who knows? Probably would have bought a house. No, wouldn't. Okay, so they said this is a mortgage reset. Delinquencies, foreclosures, prices fall. Consumer spend falls, job market erodes, recession. So it's all, a lot of things you see is cyclical. The economy it's a cyclical situation. So things cause things that cause things that cause things that cause things. That's how it works. So what did they say? So this is what they said to the portfolio companies. They said Series B and C will be smaller raises. Customer uptake will be slower. Cuts are a must. Need to become cash flow positive. So I love it. They say survival of the quickest. Avoid death spiral in all caps. Perform situation analysis. Adapt quickly. Use a zero-based budgeting approach. Make cuts. Review salaries. Employ a heavily commissioned sales structure and bolster balance sheets. Become cash flow positive as soon as possible. Spend every dollar as if it were your last. Get real or go home. Fascinating. Okay, I'm going to take a quick break here. I got to take a pee-pee. And this time, I'm going to wash my hands. Some people pointed out that I took a piss last time. I did not wash my hands. I will wash my hands because I was out. I'm actually behind the house right now, so I'm going to be able to go in real quick. Again, we don't stop recording. I will be right fucking back. We're going to talk more about the oil wars. What's going on right now between Russia and Saudi Arabia, why the price of oil is so low. I'm going to be quick. I'm going to be back in 60 seconds as quickly as possible. Please stay on the line. I will be right back, people. We're going to talk about why the price of oil fell. I'm going to turn the gain up. Take some time, enjoy yourself. If you're on your commute, just enjoy yourself, look around, be appreciative, be happy. I'm going to turn the gain up so you can listen to the environment that I'm in right now. I'm coming. You got the gain on. You can hear me. Okay, here we go, people. Oh, damn, you can see there's all this water on me. I rushed it. I honestly rushed it. I didn't even wash my hands for the full... Oh, damn, there's soap on my arm still. Damn. I didn't wash it for the full 30 seconds, the full Staying Alive. Is that the song you're supposed to sing? I don't know, but you're supposed to wash for 20 seconds. Anyway, here we go. Oil. Price of oil dropped. This is just fascinating. You may have missed this. This was early in the week. This is a fascinating time we live in. Normally, if the whole COVID thing wasn't going on, this would be, I think, more top of mind. People would be talking a lot more about this because this is really historic shit. And yes, it is caused by COVID. But let's talk about what happened. So this has been the biggest oil plunge in the last 30 years. So let me set the stage here. You've probably heard oil prices have fallen. So why did they fall? Well, economic activity will slow. So the demand for oil will decrease. So there's this international cartel called OPEC. It's the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, and it is a cartel. What that means is they fix prices to try to keep they say, keep the price of oil stable, but also keep it high. So what they do is these countries, a lot of them in the Middle East, some in Africa, what they do is they all coordinate and they say, we're going to limit output. If the price of oil is dropping too much, they say, we're going to limit output to try to prop it up. So two of the biggest oil exporters, producers, the U.S. and Russia, are not part of OPEC. And if you think about it, and the fact that this cartel is internationally a thing, imagine a giant computer company or something, just like computer companies or some other major company in some major industry fixing prices and agreeing that, okay, we're gonna agree that we're gonna decrease or increase prices, or we're gonna keep prices stable by limiting output together, and we're all gonna be on the same team. We're all gonna profit off of it. It's a hell of a thing. What it does is it shows you the power of that oil has over the world, because no one can touch these guys. If you so much as try to slap slap their wrist, they're gonna say, "Fuck you. We're not going to give you oil. You need oil to survive." So it's a hell of an interesting situation. So here's what happened. You know what? I have a lot of notes on this. But basically, what happened was, and Peter Zeihan covered this in a newsletter, and I'll link to it. And also, The Economist had a good piece on this. I'm gonna just go through kind of because I'm not gonna read here. Let's actually, you know what? Let's read. So basically, what happened was on March, Saudi Arabia and Russia, two of the world's oil superpowers, had worked together since 2016 to control output and support prices. With oil demand plunging because of the spread of COVID-19, the partnership seems more important than ever to all producers. Members of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, of which Saudi Arabia is the undeclared leader, were keen to make a deal with allied oil producers, led by Russia. But on March 6th, the meeting broke up without an agreement. So, Saudi Arabia is the leader of OPEC. They by far have the biggest reserves in the world, and have their state-run oil company Aramco is the most valuable company in the world. So they tried to make an agreement on March 6th in Vienna. It's with OPEC. The most recent OPEC, or actually, I don't know if this one was in Vienna, but basically they tried to make a deal on March 6th with Russia, and that fell through. So what happened when that deal, they couldn't agree? Russia historically has not wanted to limit production. And that's basically what keeps Russia's economy afloat right now. They're exporting of oil and natural gas, and also gives them a lot of political power. Because they supply, they're, I think, the third biggest, Europe. A lot of Europe relies on them for exporting oil to them, and natural gas. So when Russia refused to slash production, the Saudis promptly launched into a price war, offering discounts to customers and announcing an increase in output from next month. Brent crude, the global benchmark, tumbled in price from almost $50 a barrel on March 5th to below $32 on March 9th. But let's see. Some oil importers, such as Japan, may not spend their windfall gains in full, whereas many oil producers are already overstretched. Countries like Iran, Libya, and Iraq, which were in turmoil even before the outbreak of COVID-19, may become even more desperate. Even Saudi Arabia requires an oil price above $80 to balance its budget, according to the International Monetary Fund. So when the price of oil is low, obviously these exporting countries, these countries that rely on it to be high, it hurts them financially a lot. In Saudi Arabia's case, basically, Saudi Arabia is able to, that family, they're basically able to maintain power because they can promise their people, they fund themselves with all this oil and all this oil money. And when that stops flowing, they're screwed. So Russia refused to slash production. Saudi Arabia said, "Fuck you. We can do it better than you can." And Peter Zeihan points this out. They can turn production. Saudi Arabia can turn production on and off on a 3-month time scale. So why is this important? They can turn it off and on faster than almost anyone else except for American shale oil production. And why that's important is it takes a long time to react to prices. So they can turn production on and off on a 3-month timescale. If they can react faster, cut production, or start producing faster than other countries, that means it puts other countries in a hell of a situation. So, because prices are super low right now, Russia probably didn't expect that. Russia can't just turn off production. And if the prices go back up, they can't just ramp it back up. These things take time. So Russia is still producing it, and they're rock bottom prices, whereas Saudi Arabia can react more quickly. And now maybe Russia's in a position where they're going to start ramping it down. Well, guess what? When they ramp it up, it's possible. Russia starts ramping down the oil production. When Saudi Arabia starts ramping theirs down to increase prices, then it's going to take several months for Russia to be able to react to that. So it's a very interesting game. So in the most recent OPEC Plus accord in December, so OPEC Plus is OPEC plus some other countries. Members agreed to curb output by 2.1 million barrels a day to help offset rising production elsewhere. Such deals have supported the price of crude, but also seeded market share and propped up American shale. In 2018, America surpassed Saudi Arabia to become the world's biggest oil producer. So I think a lot of people miss this. The U.S. was the biggest oil producer. It passed them in 2019 in the world. So when OPEC decides to decrease production to increase prices, well, America is going to keep producing. They're going to keep producing. Obviously, they produce more when the price is higher, but they kept producing, and they took a lot of share away from OPEC. So it's a super interesting, the way energy markets and oil still keeps the world going round. That's a fact, and we need to get off it. But that's just the fact of the matter. So it was in Vienna. So I'm looking at another note. In Vienna, he pushed for an aggressive deal, announcing on March 5th that OPEC was seeking to lower output by a further 1.5 million barrels a day. Russia balked. Now Saudi Arabia seems to be taking the astonishing step of driving prices downward. The biggest discounts, $8 a barrel, was offered to Northwest Europe to squeeze Russian crude in particular, Saudi Arabia is attacking Russia. It's honestly no short of an attack on the country, because Russia absolutely, obviously not a military invasion, let's not oversell it, but my point is Russia needs this money to survive. It's obviously Putin's a dictator. The country is not doing well economically. Europe and the U.S., there's sanctions against them because Russia's been doing some naughty things. And Saudi Arabia, not only are they increasing production, they're going to the Russian markets where Russia typically makes its money and saying, we're going to give you the best discounts because fuck Russia. I think people think, and this is just, if you're in the U.S., and I think this, you obviously know more about your own country than you other countries, but I think even on the global stage, given the power and influence of the United States, I think people think that, the U.S. is allies are allies with this country, not allies with this country. We're allies with Japan, we're not allies with China. We're allies, fucking, with Germany, but we're not allies with Iran. I think people forget that it's not just the U.S. I kind of forget this sometimes. It's not just the U.S. versus, it's not the U.S. allies versus the non-U.S. allies. It's not how the world works. Even the countries that the U.S. doesn't like, or rather, even countries that the U.S. is allied with, they may not like each other, or countries that we don't like, that we're not allies with. Maybe they're not allied. That doesn't mean they're allied with each other. All these countries have their own relationships. So most people don't know. I mean, I didn't really know this until the oil crisis. Russia and Saudi Arabia don't get along. It's just a fact. So it's an interesting. It's just an interesting thing to think about. So that's going to be an interesting thing to follow, especially because we're just getting started with this. So this is really going to hurt the Russian economy. It's going to hurt the Iranian economy. So Saudi Arabia is doing a hell of a thing by keeping that output high. So we'll see what happens. Okay, so we've got a couple more things here. So that's we're going to go down memory lane a little bit more. So I'm going to talk about Robert Lighthizer, the trade representative. Then we're going to talk about the day the world changed. So this is an article by The Economist, and I think it's interesting to reflect on crises that happened before. What were people writing about then? Then we're going to end with just a few political things that I'm going to buzz through, and then some tech news. Let's see. We're at 138. Okay, let's go through this. Okay, so people talk about the trade war. Trump has been preaching about it since the 80s. He's been talking about how these countries are screwing us, blah, blah, blah. Free trade ultimately helps to tide the rises all boats. It allocates capital in the best way. Yes, there are some individuals, some certain companies may lose on overall. Many economists think that the world is better off when trade is freer. So you can watch videos in Trump talking about Japan, how they're screwing us, they're laughing at us, he said, during the 1980s. So what's interesting, so there's this book, Peter Zeihan, Disunited Nations, that I'm reading right now, and it's interesting. And don't worry, I'll bring it full back. I'm not just about the 1980s, I'll bring it full back circle. So his whole thing is post-World War II, Bretton Woods Agreement. Basically, the U.S. was the only major superpower at the end that was still intact. So what did they do? They got all these countries together, and they said, we're going to open up our markets, we're going to help you rebuild, we're going to trade, we're going to protect the tradeways, you're going to stop fighting with each other, we're all going to get super rich. His whole point is that was a bribe against the Soviets. So he called it the Order with a capital O. We bribed all these allies, we're going to get everyone super rich, and it was a way to win the Cold War. It was fighting communism, basically. What happened was Soviet Union collapsed. And there was no need for this Cold War anymore. But anyway, in the 1980s, the Republicans and Democrats, we were looking at Japan, for example. There was a big worry about how rich Japan was getting and how better off their citizens were, per capita basis than the United States. And we were saying, well, why are we letting Japan get so powerful? They're our ally, and we're the reason that they're like this in the first place, right? We are protecting global trade. We helped them rebuild. They lost World War II. How is it that they're recovering so quickly and, now doing better than we are? So it was a very political issue. Trump was on that in the 1980s. And they were also doing things, France, Germany, and Japan, he talks about this in the book, were deflating their currencies. So they were deflating their currencies so that they could, they were buying U.S. dollars, basically, so that it would decrease the prices of their goods so they could export more. So if the U.S. dollar rises in value and their own currency lowers in value, it encourages people to buy from them. So Ronald Reagan got some people together and said, yo, you got to cut this shit out. You can't keep deflating your currencies and making it easier to trade. China famously does this. Now they're the biggest. They do this all the time now, more recently. But this was a big issue in the 1980s. So who did Ronald Reagan send in the 1980s to Japan to make sure that to Tokyo, to make sure that they stopped deflating their currency? A gentleman by the name of Robert Lighthizer, who is the trade representative for President Trump now. So Robert Lighthizer was doing this shit 4 decades ago, about 1980s. Yeah, late 1980s, like 1986 or something. Now Trump's chief, trade negotiator, Robert Lighthizer, is on his team. Is his chief trade negotiator doing these trade negotiations with China right now. So it's just an interesting full circle thing that that is coming back now. And also, Peter Zeihan talks about this, and he's saying the order has been cracking since the 1980s. Basically, that the U.S., it was the first time in the 1980s where the U.S. questioned the whole, we're protecting the trade routes, we're allowing frictionless trade, we're keeping the world peaceful. They were starting to question that. Why are we spending all this money to make everyone else rich? There's a direct line from that to Robert Lighthizer in the White House right now. And his point is that this is not just Trump. This is not just a Trump phenomenon. He sped it up, but he thinks America on the whole is starting to care less and less about global affairs. So it's just an interesting little tidbit, interesting times we live in. Okay, so The Economist had so this we're going to talk about 9/11 now. There was a publication, or there's an article that they published on September 13th, 2001. It's called "The Day the World Changed," and it's interesting to go back. I'm just going to read some of these excerpts because they're super interesting. I might just read all of them because it's super interesting to go back and read this stuff. A lot of them have been spot on to today. So here's what it says: the appalling atrocities of September 11th. Acts that must be seen as a declaration of war, not just on America, but on all civilized people, were crueler in conception and even more shocking than what happened in Hawaii. Hawaii being attacks on Pearl Harbor. In so many ways, and for understandable reasons, it being the United States, has been unprepared to face such evil. Modern Americans have never learned to live with terrorism or with enemy action of any kind within their borders. They have not needed to. Neither the attack of 1993 on the World Trade Center nor the bombing in Oklahoma in 1995 had changed that. Even the attack on Pearl Harbor was remote from the country's heartland. At home, Americans felt safe in a way they never will again. It did seem a mistake, perhaps a sign of the country's innocence in these affairs, that Mr. Bush should be hurried to safety in Nebraska, which I didn't know this. I didn't know this happened. Mr. Bush should be hurried to safety in Nebraska in the first instance, rather than to the White House or to the ruins in Manhattan or Washington. At such times, the president's security ought not to be the overriding priority. Exercising leadership and being seen to do so must come first. But if it is fair to call that a momentary misstep, it was soon put right. So they go on to talk about the interesting. I gotta adjust the hair for a sec. Okay, we're good. So they go on to talk about I'll just read it. So, for years, visiting Europeans have been either alarmed or delighted, according to temperament, to discover that boarding an airliner in America is as easy as boarding a train back home. Bags checked at the curb, tickets issued on the flash of a driving license, minimal or no inspection of cabin baggage. This, it now sadly emerges, was a fool's paradise. Security at America's airports will have to be brought up to the same stifling standards as those endured in the rest of the developed world. That will entail much longer queues, much more bureaucracy, even more delays in an industry already detested for all these things. So I didn't really realize that the U.S. was in the minority in our lax airport security. So they called this more bureaucracy, absolutely. TSA, Homeland Security, doing more of this shit now, and even more delays. More delays, of course. Now you got to get at the airport much sooner. So it's an interesting thing. Much more worrying is that a new balance between liberty and security may have to be struck more broadly, and not just in the United States. Spying infringes everyone's freedom, everyone's privacy, not just that of the enemy. Just where this balance will be struck or should be struck in a liberal democracy remains unclear. In the face of the implacable evil witnessed this week, the answer may have changed. This was super telling. We would find out later, based on the Snowden leaks, that the U.S. would go on to spy on, collect wholesale, data wholesale on all U.S. citizens, and this was after lying to Congress about it. Let's see, General Clapper spoke to Congress and said, "We do not wittingly do bulk data collection on Americans." That turned out to be false. The NSA lied to the American people, lied to Congress about what they were in fact doing. So this turned out to be very, very true. So it goes on to say, among the enemies of America and the West are men who do not fire missiles, but who hijack aircraft full of fuel and fly them into crowded buildings. The missile shield program, whatever its merits, must not mitigate against efforts to improve security against other kinds of threat. So at this time, I think the whole missile defense shield program was like a big talking point, how we're going to keep ourselves and our allies secure. And this is an interesting thing. So, and it is right for Mr. Bush to put American interests first. America first, you hear Trump say that. All governments should put their own national interests first, but mutually compatible national interests are often best served through cooperation. Without doubt, when it comes to international terrorism, a new spirit of common resolve is indispensable. America's allies in NATO have proclaimed their willingness to stand up and be counted by invoking, for the first time in the history of the organization, its Article 5 on mutual defense. NATO, Article 5, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which just celebrated 75th year anniversary, I believe, It's the most successful treaty in the history of, the modern time. Any treaty. It's been absolutely successful in terms of how long it's endured. Article 5 says an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. The only time that has been invoked to date, September 12th, 2001. That is what it was. It was an attack on all. The symbolism of the gesture is everything one could wish. Now America must demand and receive the tangible support it implies. So, again, this is The Economist talking about 9/11, published this September 13, 2001. So at this point, which I didn't realize, suspicions point to Osama bin Laden, but there are other possibilities, including just conceivably homegrown lunatics. Soon it will no doubt be possible to say with confidence who the perpetrators were. But if it does turn out to be bin Laden, that by itself will not give the answer to the question, how much force in reply? I think we're still grappling with this. And their little byline saying the day the world changed is absolutely true. This changed everything. 9/11 changed everything. Scenes of Palestinians and other Muslims celebrating this week's horrors may seem an unendurable provocation. But America must take care in the coming days that it does not create more would-be martyrs than, through military action, it can destroy. The strategy, easier said than done, to put it mildly, must be to make friends with opponents who are capable of reason while moving firmly against those who are both incapable of it and willing to resort to or assist in acts such as those seen this week. The response of America and its allies should not be timid, but it should be measured. So this next little closing paragraph is interesting because we're seeing this with Trump. We're seeing, 2 decades later, we're seeing that America is starting to. We're seeing this with attack on free trade agreements from the left and the right. This isn't just Trump. This is an America that's increasingly being closed off where it was 40 years ago. Our military footprint across the world, our military bases, has decreased over the last several decades. We're absolutely pulling back. So this is a very interesting paragraph. Again, this is how they closed out. Is there a danger that America will choose in the end to retreat behind a different kind of shield? Not one that guards against missiles, but one that aims to shut out the world? The United States, no less than other great powers, has had an isolationist streak. George Washington said it was his true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world. That's a direct quote. Our belief and our fervent hope is that the answer is no. Thanks to America and only thanks to America, the world has enjoyed these past decades an age of hitherto unimagined freedom and opportunity. Those who would deflect it from its path must not and surely will not succeed. I get shivers reading that. Obviously I was a young lad in 01, so I didn't realize a lot of I didn't realize any of this stuff at the time. But to going back and read publications, read what they were saying about the certain crises that we've gone through. It's helpful to read what people were feeling like during the Great Depression. I've seen some people tweet some of that stuff out. It's just an interesting, very, very telling. The Economist was already talking about spying. This will infringe on free people's rights. That turned out to be true. Will America start closing itself off? I think they're probably closing it off. We're starting to close it off for other reasons. I don't think necessarily it's that we retreated. In fact, it was probably definitely the opposite. We didn't retreat. We got wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. I think it was called Operation Iraqi Freedom. Was what it was officially called. It's just an interesting. I thought that was just a really. I just want to share that with y'all because I was reading on that. I was reading that and thinking about it. Okay, so we're gonna talk. We got a few more politics stuff to talk about and some tech stuff. Then we're gonna wrap this up. Okay, so politics. So there's viral Biden. There's a viral video of Joe Biden. He was misspeaking, but it was shared by someone in the Trump campaign. I forget, and I'll link to this, but basically they cut the video off. So shared by Trump's campaign, retweeted by Trump, and also shared on Trump's Facebook. Basically, here, I'll read the full quote of what Biden said. And here's why this is important, because Twitter, for the first time, which I went and saw the tweet, they no longer did it, but it said, they put a flag on it, and this is the first time they used it. They said this is, what's the word they used? They said this is, I forget, but basically they labeled it, don't trust it. Instagram, Facebook did the same thing. So it's a very interesting it's a very interesting thing when you have a private company. I'm not saying they shouldn't do this. It's just a very interesting world we live in where, you have a private company making a decision on what can be shared. Obviously, you want to mitigate disinformation, but it's just a hell of a thing that these tools that many people rely on to get truth out there. It's people behind closed doors making the decision on what you can and cannot read. So again, I'm not saying they shouldn't do this. It's just an interesting question. So here's the full quote. If you want a nominee who will bring this party together, this is Joe Biden speaking at a rally, who will run a progressive, positive campaign and turn this primary from a campaign that's about negative attacks into one about what we're for, because we cannot get reelect. We cannot win this reelection. Excuse me. We can only reelect Donald Trump if, in fact, we get engaged in the circular firing squad here. It's got to be a positive campaign. So join us. So the video was cut off that was shared was, we can only reelect Donald Trump. They cut out the last part. So it wasn't manipulated. It was the clip was cut short. So it's just an interesting. We're starting to see these things be used. And when you went to the Facebook, and I watched this video on Instagram, I couldn't even figure out how to play it on Facebook. I think there was a way, but you have to basically click this thing. You have to click a disclaimer that says, yes, I know this has been fact checked and this is misinformation, and then you can watch it. But it's an interesting thing is, the power here. So it's just the power of these private companies to be able to just say, this is misinformation. And how you decide to do that. It's truly interesting times we live in. Okay, also on February 13th, the Senate passed. Okay, so something that's been going on with the executive branch. A lot of people have been saying this. This isn't from me. Executive branch. It's been getting more powerful the last several decades. Congress. You used to need Congress for a whole host of things. Now the executive branch can do a lot of the stuff itself unilaterally. We can basically go to war without Congress's approval. This was some legislation passed in post 9/11. I forgot what it was called, but So people look at Trump doing all this shit without Congress's approval, executive actions. Obama was doing the same thing. I'm not saying Trump's doing. I'm not comparing the two and saying one's better. I'm not doing no false equivalency here. Okay. But I think people miss the point that when their guy is in the White House, they don't care about how much power the executive authority has. And when their guy isn't in the White House, a lot of people pissed off at the things Trump can do from the executive branch without needing Congress's approval. It's a scary thing. So people say, I can't believe Trump's doing that. My question I always tell people, or what I tell it, this isn't a Trump thing. Yes, he's doing bad stuff. The executive branch has too much power. The fact that someone can get in there and do all these things, he can limit just, the ACA, for example, without going through Congress. Congress passed the ACA, but then Trump can do things to fuck with it. Yes, it's right to say Trump should not be doing these things. Sure. What we need to be saying is the executive branch needs to be, we need his power limited, full stop. This isn't a radical thing. The whole checks and balances, Congress is asleep at the wheel. You talk about foreign policy. Congress used to have a big effect on that. Now it's basically all run out of the executive branch. So this is an interesting trends. Look at the trends. What allows Trump to be doing these things from the executive branch without Congress's approval? So anyway, a silver lining here: Congress not falling asleep at the wheel. So Senate War Powers Resolution Act. Passed 55 to 45, and this was passed February 13th, 2020. 8 Republican senators joined the Dems. This was passed after what's his name? General Qasem Soleimani, who was the Iranian military commander that was killed in a strike. I believe he wasn't in Iran. He was in Afghanistan. I think he was in Afghanistan. I forget where he was. Or no, I think he was in Iraq. I forget exactly where he was, but remember, everyone remembers this. This is when we almost went to war with Iran, which, we didn't. I wasn't worried we were going to go to war with them, but it was a hell of an attack. Even though the UN security, whatever it's called, said that Qasem Soleimani, whichever country he was in, he's not allowed to be there. He was never allowed to be there. It doesn't mean we need to blow him to bits and antagonize the Iranians, but It's that's just an interesting thing. I think that's missed in covering this. But anyway, they passed a war power resolution that said, okay, this limits the president can't do unilateral things against Iran. So this was on March. Let's see. Oh yeah, on Wednesday, March 11, 2020, it passed in the House. So it's going to go to Trump's desk, and he's going to veto it because the Senate or the House don't have a 2/3 majority. He's going to veto it. But at least it's showing a ray of hope and trying to limit some of the. Now again, this is only with regards to Iran. It's not doing sweeping changes to the executive branch as a whole. It's very specific to Iran. But it's I think it's a ray of hope. We see that bipartisanship is historically. It's really an all-time low if you look at voting records, the amount that the left only votes with the left and the right only votes with the right. This has been documented. This isn't just, in the air. I feel like people can't really get along anymore. No, this is documented. This is official shit. But so, yeah, anyway, it's interesting to see, some partisanship come through, and we appreciate that. Also, this is interesting. So I totally forgot about this shit, but March 11th, 2019 was the last day the White House press briefing. It was the last White House press briefing. It's been a year since they do press briefings. So Stephanie Grisham, who works for Trump, I think she's the new Huckabee Sanders. So who's I think the head of the. I don't know. I forget the name of the role, honestly. Again, this is shooting from there, but I forget the name of the role. But basically, this is what she said. President Trump communicates directly with the American people more than any president in history. The fact that the White House press corps can no longer grandstand on TV is of no concern to us. Yeah, that's been closed a year where the reporters could ask questions directly to the president and other, his press person. We remember, who was that? Mikey Spicer. Remember him? He's getting frothing at the mouth, and those things were just a nightmare. So I remember when they were holding those briefings. And this was right after I was in D.C. for the inauguration. I was protesting the Trump inauguration, and he gave a talk about. Remember, this was the whole scandal. Spicy was saying that the crowds were bigger than ever and the sun was shining, or I think Trump said the sun was shining. I forget, but basically, I remember being there. I was there. The crowds were not nearly as big as the Women's March the next day. So it was just, I was there. There was there wasn't even on the same level, but I remember just seeing that and be like, holy fuck, like, this is some 1984 shit right now. Like, I was there. I saw with my own eyes, and they were straight lying. So that really freaked me out. Anyway, that hasn't been going on for a year. I didn't even know that. I forgot that. I just saw this on Axios. I've been liking Axios lately. I followed them on Twitter recently. See some of their headlines. I think they do leveled, pretty solid reporting. They have a good idea of the tech landscape. I think they do some good shit. So they still use that press room. So Mike Mulvaney, that podium, he famously said. In October, that freezing military aid to Ukraine was conditioned on investigations of political rivals. He was later forced to walk those comments back in the midst of impeachment heat against the president. That's where Pence did some of his early COVID talks. So they still use the room, but the press can't ask questions. A big part of a democracy. And I get the press sensationalized. Maybe they grandstand a little bit, but dude, that's what you sign up for. The press has a right to ask questions. Absolutely. And they have a right to ask our leaders questions and have a steady cadence of doing so. So the fact that that has been limited is just, it's sad. That's some third world country shit right there. That's not the United States of America. We don't shun the media and journalism here. We don't. And we need to stop. We need to stop doing it. Don't get me wrong, I'll be the first to say a lot of journalism is sensationalist. I think a lot of media is, but shit, nothing's perfect. We're all tumbling through this world. We're all trying to figure it out, and you just got to look at what's in any situation. What's the best thing to do given the alternative? Yes, is the media sensationalist sometimes? Absolutely. does that mean just stop talking to the president of the United States? Should just stop talking to them all together? The office of the president should just stop talking to them all together? Like, it's just ridiculous. Okay, so we're going to talk. Look, we just have some tech stuff here to close out on, a little bit of blockchain stuff, and we're almost wrapping up here. Let's see. This is 2 hours and 3 minutes. Okay, not too bad. Damn, this is longer than one a week ago. Okay. So Amazon just walk out. That's their new that's something, a new tech they're licensing. So remember, this is Amazon Go. That's the store you can walk in, grab whatever you want, walk out, leave, and it just charges you. You don't have to talk to a cashier. You just pick out the stuff and you walk out. It's insane. I've done it before a couple times in San Francisco. They had an Amazon Go there. It is magic. It is insane. You walk in, you grab the shit, you leave. They have all these cameras set up and do all this image processing and video processing to determine what you took and what you put back. And then you get, after you walk out, you don't know how much you're charged. It has to do like, there was a few, I forgot, it was about an hour of processing to determine of number crunching and video crunching to see what exactly you got. Then they send you, they just charge your card. It's incredible. Anyway, they're going to start, this was reported by Ben Thompson, they're going to start licensing this out to other stores. I think this is super, super interesting tech. So they're going to start licensing. You're going to be able to, in 10 years, within 10 years, it's going to be commonplace, I think. In fact, we're getting a prediction. I like to keeping track of my prediction, so I might have to publish this one. But I think it's reasonable that some stores at this point, I mean, they already exist, Amazon Go, but that you'll be able to walk into a decent number of stores and just walk out without having to talk to a cashier, and it just tracks what you picked up. It's absolutely insane. Also, people talk about job losses, and Andrew Yang was talking about getting universal basic income, often abbreviated UBI, because so many jobs, automation is going to kill so many jobs. So listen, here's my hot take on that, and that is jobs have been getting destroyed for decades, and destroyed, and new jobs have been coming for several decades, for centuries even. So a technology comes, destroys a job, then new jobs get created. That's how it's always done. And Mark Andreessen has a really good point. He'll say this. He said this in at least one interview. He's a venture capital guy, and he says, if you look at the jobs reports for the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics that the U.S. government puts out, you see like, the economy added 200,000 jobs in February, for example. What you don't see is the amount of jobs that were destroyed. 200,000 is just the net. In reality, a bunch of jobs were destroyed. So call it 500,000 jobs destroyed, 700,000 jobs added. So we're already destroying jobs all the time. So when people talk about automation destroying jobs and all that stuff, yes, it may happen, but I'm a big fan of let's wait till it's a problem. Let's wait till it begins a problem. Right now we have the lowest unemployment we've ever had. And yeah, you can talk about the issues with how we, with the unemployment percent, people have just flat stopped looking for work. So unemployment only counts people looking for work. So that's fair. But let's wait and see before we start saying the government needs to guarantee jobs and we need to do all this regulation to ensure that stuff. Let's wait and see. Another thing, Waymo, which is out of Google Alphabet now. Alphabet's the parent company, Google. Now Alphabet's the holding company, which Google is under, and Waymo's under as well. They raised $2.25 billion. So Waymo was spun out. It's its own company. Well, it hasn't been spun out yet. It's still owned by Alphabet. But there's an increasing decision at Google to stop funding these side bets and stop burning money on these side bets that are not core to the business. Google makes money on ads, full stop. That's how they make money. Why are they spending, taking those ad revenues and just doing whatever they want with it, and not giving that money back to shareholders? So it's fair. So what did Waymo do? Waymo's raising $2.25 billion. A lot of people I don't think really know this. Waymo's doing self-driving taxi rides in Phoenix right now. There's no one in the car. You go in, you order it, you pick up, boom, bada bing, bada boom. So what it's looking like they might do is they might actually sell their tech to other self-driving other automobile companies. Waymo is currently the best in the game right now. Full stop. They're currently leading. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do with it. But it's also interesting to look at Google's now like, no, you got to raise your own money. And yes, Google gave some of money in that 2.25 billion, but they're not just going to fund this wholeheartedly, all the way. They're going to say, no, you got to raise outside funding. There's now a pressure at Google that they can't just throw their money at these, these moonshot bets, but they need to actually start making money. Okay. So there's been some interesting stuff, and this is still developing, but I talked a little bit about this previously. Crypto prices have absolutely tanked, and I need to actually update my own prediction. I said I would do this. I need to do this. I thought crypto flows would increase, which was naive in retrospect, but that's why I'm upfront about this shit. I'm upfront when I'm wrong. That's one of the core tenets of what I'm doing here. I really want to be transparent about where I'm getting my information and about when I'm wrong. I thought crypto would increase, crypto prices would increase, Bitcoin, Ethereum would increase when equities decreased, or when there's a global crisis. This is a global crisis. They've absolutely fallen, just like equities, fallen more so. So it's not a safe haven. But anyway, there's an interesting thing. So I've talked a lot about this. I think the single biggest thing in blockchain right now is the fact that I can send a US dollar anywhere in the world to someone with a smartphone and an internet connection, full stop. How do I do that? Well, it's on the Ethereum blockchain. There's a couple different ways you can do that. There's something called Tether USDT, which is a little shady, in my opinion. Then there's USDC. USDC is by the Circle Consortium, which Coinbase is a member of. So basically, it's on the Ethereum blockchain. They have a coin for every USDC on the Ethereum, or token rather, on the Ethereum blockchain. They have $1 in the bank reserves. So that when I at any point I can go to Coinbase and say, I have a USDC here, give me a US dollar, a fiat real US dollar, like a dollar I can put in my checking account, my Bank of America checking account. That's a super, super interesting real world use case right now that you can do with cryptocurrency today. There's another thing called the Maker Foundation, which has its own stablecoin pegged to the US dollar. It's called DAI. DAI. And the way it works is you basically deposit, you open up a collateralized debt position. And this sounds like the global financial crisis, right? But I'll promise why I'll tell you why I'm bringing this up. You have a collateralized debt position that you open up. So let's say you have Ether, and I think you can use some others. I think you can use the basic attention token, or I think their plan is to open it to others as well. But most people are using Ether. So if I have $300 worth of Ether, which is the token that you pay to do transactions on Ethereum, if I have $300 worth of Ether, I can put it in a collateralized debt position. You often see it abbreviated CDP, and I can withdraw up to $100 of DAI. So I put $300 worth of Ethereum, or ETH, and I get $100. I mint $100 of DAI, which is pegged to the US dollar. So you say, okay, why if I put $300 worth of ETH, why can I only get $100? Or Ether, you can say either one. Well, because it needs to be over collateralized, right? Because if the value of Ethereum goes down, there needs to be a buffer. So that if it's 1-to-1, if the value of Ethereum drops down and you've printed out 100 DAI, then the whole thing gets out of whack, and then your position is going to be liquidated. And this gets technically, and I still haven't fully wrapped my head around it, but the basics are the way that it kind of keeps. There's a few different ways that it works. There's a few different things it relies on, but one of the basic things is the way that DAI is pegged to the US dollar is if DAI falls below $1, you can buy cheap DAI to get your Ethereum back for cheaper. So let's say if you can then get DAI for 95 cents, I can buy that DAI on the market and liquidate my Ethereum. I can give that to close that CDP contract. I can give the DAI back and get my Ethereum back at a discounted rate because the DAI fell. Now, what happens if the DAI goes above $1? Well, if it goes to $1.05, you can then generate more DAI against your Ether and put more DAI into the system. So all of a sudden, now the DAI is worth, each DAI is now worth $1.05. Now, the amount you need to back up your position with your ETH holdings is you don't need as much. So what does that mean? You can print more DAI. When you print more, the value of it goes down. So there's this very interesting game theoretic, incentive structure to keep the price of DAI stable. There's also oracles, which report the price of Ether to the system, so that they report the market price of Ether and the market price of DAI, so that they can keep this whole system going. But this is interesting. When prices, and this is still unfolding, so this isn't a complete story here. I still haven't put all the pieces together, and frankly, I've been spending more energy on the COVID stuff. But because the crypto markets have fallen so quickly, those CDPs, that the value that they were worth fell a lot. So those positions were getting liquidated. So it caused a lot of havoc. And I was seeing some Reddit thread right before I went live with this. I was seeing people were complaining about the fact that they got absolutely screwed. That their CDPs were closed, and they were again, I'm a little shaky on the details on this, but basically because the value of Ether fell so much, it screwed some people out of they basically lost. So I saw this one Reddit post. I think he had like 1,700 Ether, which is which is no small chunk of money, and it was basically sold for an extremely low amount, because the value it was converted. I believe it was converted into DAI. Again, I'm a little shaky on this, but what you need to know is that when the price of these underlying assets that back the CDP, when the price of them change a lot, like when they decrease a lot, it causes problems. And the system, the Maker Foundation, it's designed to handle this stuff, but when it goes super fast, problems can happen. So we're kind of seeing this unfold. And one of the interesting things that's coming out of this is you can currently get for DAI, you can get a 17% interest rate on your DAI right now, which is a US dollar backed. It's not US dollar backed. Excuse me. It's pegged to the US dollar, but there's not an actual US dollar in a bank account that is one-to-one matching it. So this is super interesting situation going on, unfolding. I'll likely follow up next time we talk. But there's some really interesting stuff there. So we'll see what goes on. I also think so. Ben Thompson did an awesome interview with the guy that started Automatic, which is a company that. Oh yeah, so this is kind of closing thoughts now at this point, people. Automatic is a company that's fully distributed. Everyone works from home. Everyone works from wherever they want. Internet first. Bada bing, bada boom. An interesting point he made is that when people work from home, rather than have to go into cities and or go into centralized locations or go into offices, what do? He's saying something interesting. They invest in their community. So if all of a sudden you get to work from home in the suburbs, you're more likely to have your roots and spend more time in these more suburban communities. It's not just everyone focused in on the city and then go back and live somewhere else. If you're living in the same place you're working, there's something special about that. So I think that's an interesting thing, is the question of working from home is really getting put to the test right now, with those people that normally wouldn't do it are doing it because of COVID-19. How does that change the landscape? I think we're just it's a really interesting interview. Again, Ben Thompson of Stratechery, that's his publication. It's a really good publication. Really interesting interview. But what happens when more people are working from home? And I think it's only going to increase. I think we're just getting started. I work from home, and I'm so far been a big fan of it. I work from home. I have a podcast. I just do the podcast every day. No, I actually do other work. I'm an Android developer. Do that shit too. Someone's got to pay the bills, because shit, you guys ain't giving me fucking enough money right now on Patreon, all that. I got about $24 a month, and we appreciate that. Half that's going to Charlie. We appreciate that. But no, I do have a day job. My point is that working from home, I think, is only going to increase in importance. It's going to be easier to use, especially as internet gets better. People get the tools that people use to communicate online get better, and people get people get more used to them. I think that's a huge part of working from home, is shifting organizations to be work from home friendly, rather than just calling into a video call and like have your meetings that way. Why not just scrap meetings? Why not do everything is written down, which is Automatic talks a little about their processes. They have basically an internal tool that people report on different things that the company is doing, different little siloed, different teams on what they're doing. And rather than having to go to these meetings, it's all published. It's all there. You can read it in text. You can read it at your leisure. You don't have to go to the meeting. It's all right there. So it's an interesting thing. So I think we're seeing the work from home thing, I think, is going to be accelerated because of this, because I think people are going to realize that this ain't a half bad thing. Anyway, we covered a lot of stuff. Again, don't let the details of the COVID-19, we don't really know this, we don't really know that, we don't really, you're right, we don't really know. We can make educated guesses about what is going on, but the reality is the single best thing you can do: limit exposure, stay in your home as much as you can. If you can work from home, do it. Don't go to restaurants. Food can go. Obviously, you got to go get food. Go to the grocery store, get your food, but limit exposure. You may be healthy, but you could give it to someone else that could get sick and potentially die. So we all wash your hands. We all got to do our part. Damn, how long was this? 2 hours and 20 minutes. Holy shit. We got to figure out a better... recommendation, people. I want to hear from you. Recommendation on how the FOOC, we should make this go faster. If I should make it go faster, reach out, dick@nogradient.com. Curious your thoughts. I'm on Twitter, Dick C. Lucas. Instagram, Dick C. Lucas. Would appreciate monetary support. The more support I have, the more I can do this, the more time I can spend on this. Appreciate the people already supporting on Patreon, Venmo, Cash App, Dick Lucas. You can support there. Half of this is going to producer Charlie, Finley, legend. And we're trying to build something here, so I really appreciate your feedback. I appreciate your energy. This is long. I'm still experimenting with all this. I appreciate you listening. And we're gonna keep moving forward. We're gonna keep figuring this out. Stay calm, be strong for your friends and family. Never let a crisis go to waste. Use this as an opportunity to show how strong you are for others. Show how strong you are for yourself. Use an opportunity to change habits. Think about, maybe should I be saving more money? Should I be thinking more about a whole host of things? Should I be trying to live a healthier lifestyle? All these things. This is an opportunity. So seize it, use it. Great talking to everyone. Thanks for stopping by. And we will stay safe, stay strong. We'll talk again, and we'll keep this whole thing going. Okay. God bless. Peace.